All right. Looks like we're live. Can you hear me, guys?
Very good. Good.
Oh,
It's a
fantastic.
lot, man.
It is alive. It's so exciting to be finally talking about the Young Writers Program and sharing what we're going to be doing with the world, I guess. And I'm so happy to have you involved as well, Garth, in helping us launch it, and then also to find a little bit about your process in a Q&A and find out what kind of things you do to help you write and what you do to in your day job, essentially, and what else, and also to give you an opportunity to talk about the upcoming book Clariel, which is so exciting. But before I start, thanks for coming, and also thank you very much to the Centre for Youth Literature for supporting us and for making and helping us have you and Will Kostakis as part of this program. It's such a great help to have people like yourself involved.
It's a great centre. They do great work.
Oh, totally. Have you done much with them before?
I was at Reading Matters last year, which is a fantastic conference. And I've been involved in various odds and ends over the years. It's a tremendous centre, and it's always great to work with anything they're involved with.
Yeah, so enthusiastic, and I am going to talk a little bit about them later, but yeah, it's such a wonderful help to have Geordie and the team helping out with the Young Writers Program. I guess that's a good segue for me to then start talking about what's going to happen this year at the Young Writers Program. So, the way that I'm going to work this is essentially I'm going to show you a slideshow from my I'm going to share my screen, but also after that, then you have a Q&A with yourself, and then open it up to Twitter, which hopefully people will have lots of questions for you. And the hashtag we're going to be using is hashtag YYWP14, so Young Writers Program 14. And I'll be monitoring Twitter as we go along. Any questions people have, please tweet in. So I'll share my screen first.
Okay.
With everybody. So
here we go.
Can you see my screen?
I can see a fairly cosmic screen.
What about now?
Yes, I can see it now. There was a sort of Escher effect going on there. It was.
You're going inside the mind of my computer.
Yeah, that's right. We're delving deep.
Can you see it now? Can you see the PowerPoint?
National Young Writers Festival, yes. I see a hand holding a book.
Yeah, that's actually the hand of one of our co-directors this year. That's Jessica Ellis at a reading last year, and yeah, she's going to be part of the program again, obviously in lots of different ways, mainly in a poetry focus. But yeah, it's going to be happening at the Labor Day long weekend in Newcastle, and the Young Writers Program is part of that. It's a sub-festival in some ways, and last year we really opened it up so that people outside of Newcastle could get there, which is often a very difficult thing to do if you're 14 years old and you're living in Perth to get to a festival in Newcastle in terms of time and money. So what we're doing right now is actually a really great I guess, exemplar of how it will work, in that I'll be using Google Hangouts to communicate with people in different parts of Australia. So yeah, it's so exciting, and it worked well last year, and I'm proud to be doing it again. So essentially the program is for 13 to 17-year-old writers from around Australia. Last year we had people in WA, Queensland, South Australia, and this year we've already got people registered from Victoria and country New South Wales, which is awesome, and potentially even Northern Territory. But there's going to be more on that. Yeah, it's so exciting, and there's a series of activities leading up to the festival. One of them is going to be produced by the 100-Story Building out of Melbourne, which do great work. We're in talks with a couple of other places around that will also do a few activities to help us out. But it's essentially a comprehensive writing program led by emerging writers in Newcastle. So the program is for 4 days. Will Kostakis is actually going to be involved as well this year, courtesy of the Centre for Youth Literature, and all of it is going to be available in Newcastle and online, which is bit of a logistical task, but it's got a lot of fun. And finally, and most importantly, really, is the relationship the younger young writers have with the National Young Writers Festival mentors. They really help younger people work on their stories and figure out if writing's what they want to do. So it's a real passion project of mine. I'm proud to be doing it again. Yeah. Actually, I wanted to ask you, Garth, what were you like as a 13 to 17-year-old? Were you big into writing at school?
Yeah, I was. I started writing very, very young. It's never too early to start writing, even if you just for fun. You never know what will become of your writing. I love reading. I love writing stories. I love telling stories. So I think if I hadn't become a writer, I might well have been some sort of professional liar, which would not have been a good thing. It's much more socially acceptable to make up stories in books than it is to make up stories to sell bridges you don't own or things like that. So, yeah, I love making stuff up, but I love writing it down as well. I love writing, and I wrote a lot from quite an early age.
What kind of things were you writing as a young person?
Well, I mostly wrote the kinds of things that I write now. I mostly wrote fantasy and science fiction. I've always read absolutely everything, and I still do read very widely. I love all genres, all categories of fiction and non-fiction. I read a lot of non-fiction as well. But I seem to have a sort of natural bent towards fantasy in particular. Even when I try and write something that's totally realistic, it's, a contemporary realistic story, it nearly always ends up becoming strange. Something fantastical will come into it. So it just seems to be the way that I am, and that's what I guess I started doing. I just kept doing it with a few variations into other things as well.
I might come back to this because this seemed like a really rich vein of questions to ask you, but I might come back to those questions, Garth, if you don't mind. So yeah, these are some of the YYWPers last year. I think we need to come up with a better nickname than that, I think. but this is Hayley and Matilda talking about Matilda's story.
You've got lots of writers there. Surely someone could come up with a great name. Too much difficulty. It could be a challenge for this year's festival to come up with the right name.
I think you're onto something. That's a really good idea. I put it out on Twitter and asked the participants. But yeah, and this is in the top right-hand corner. This is Lachlan Brown, a poet and academic who was helping Kuhan and Dai Ming with something that we're working on. They're actually HSC Extension 2 students that we're working on a major work for the next year. So they were year 11 going into year 12. And that's Bonnie down the bottom right-hand corner there doing some story starters for us because we had this wonderful space in Newcastle called The Loft, which was essentially a youth centre, and we had so many wonderful resources. This year we're actually at a place called Inks, which is a startup hub, actually, so it's a completely different vibe altogether, but still going to have that online element, and we're going to have our own space, which is really exciting.
Got an appropriate name.
Inks.
Yes.
It's going to be great, and so yeah, this is a dinosaur they gave me last year for the Express Media Award for Best Program for Young Writers in New South Wales. I'm not sure whether that's a comment on my. I'm not sure if that's a comment on my age though. I mean, I am 33 this year, so I'm probably just a bit like on the older side of the younger writers program. So it's
right.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You're just a whippersnapper from my point of view. Your point of view changes rapidly as you get older. What you consider old just keeps going further off.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, and I guess we're, as I said, showing you exactly how it works right now. We do the online component through Google Hangouts, so participants will need to have a Gmail account, but certainly won't miss out on anything because it will be broadcast through YouTube, and conversations will happen through Google. So yeah, the basic structure of the program, we start off on Thursday with a bit of a getting to know you kind of activity. often the people that come to this program are the only person at their school that really loves writing, and they bravely come by themselves. And this is Kalisha and Gabby and Haley again on what we call the story trail. So they went out to Newcastle and I gave them a bunch of different writing activities, mainly to do with the place. And people in other parts of Australia were also encouraged to do this, and then share them when they came back to the hub. So that's a nice little way of starting off. Pardon me, excuse me.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun, and that's the main part about this program, is that it's for people that are trying to figure out if writing's for them, and make it as enjoyable and as educational as possible. Speaking of learning things, the Fridays is going to be full of master classes, and I'm really excited to mention that we've got the following excellent National Young Writers Festival mentees. Benjamin Law's going to have a chat with me about freelancing and how to get started, forging a career out of writing articles, fiction, getting book deal, all that kind of stuff. And he's just so generous with his time, and it'll be excellent.
He's also very, very funny. He's a very funny man.
He's extremely hilarious. I might have to ask him to censor himself sometimes. So,
perhaps. I love his column. I love his column in The Good Weekend. It's always very amusing.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having him involved, and I think the participants will really get something out of it. Amy Middleton and Amy Dale are also going to talk about non-fiction writing, particularly from a journalistic standpoint. There might be some participants that come along that are interested in writing feature articles and those types of things. Dylan Burns is going to help us with review writing. Emmy Ray and Zenobia Frost are going to do something on poetry, and then Charlotte McConaughey is going to talk about genre fiction. It's a real passion. She said she was happy to talk about that. So yeah, lots of cool stuff happening on the Friday, and then in the evening we're actually going to be working on pitches. So we're going to learn how to pitch your story in a 2 or 3 sentence kind of way. And on Saturday, we are very lucky to have Will Costicus, who I just heard from via Twitter is in Omaha, Nebraska. the lucky thing. He's trekking from the west to the east of the states in a car, I think. And he's going to be working with the participants with tips and tricks on how to get a book deal at 17, he said, which is pretty impressive. Okay, and so the Saturday we'll have a pitch a story opportunity. Last year we had people from the Thousands, Random House, as well as the Lifted Brow, hearing the participants' pitches. So that was pretty great. Garth, you still there?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I was being too immobile there. I'm listening.
Oh no, I was just worried that we dropped out. And finally,
my impersonation of a frozen screen.
I thought you'd gone too deep into the mind of my computer for a minute.
Sorry, I'm just alarming you now. Carry on.
Sorry, mate. And so and Sunday the participants get to share their stories, the things they've been working on for the last 4 days leading up to it. And this is Sam George Allen here from Scum Magazine talking to Jess about her pitch, and that's one of the greatest parts of this particular program, is that over 4 days these young people have really shaped their understanding of who they are as writers, and feel confident to share them with other people, which is really exciting.
Great.
Yeah. Have you ever? I just wanted to ask you about this. Actually, I was going to ask you in the general chat, but have you ever had a mentor relationship with anybody with your writing?
Well, not really in a personal sense, except of course that I think everything you read is providing you with an educational experience. I certainly learned a lot about how to write from the books that I read, and I have to say I think that ultimately, while it's great to have mentors and it's fantastic if you do have them, it's not essential. And most authors are, in fact, self-taught to a large degree. So sometimes I do sometimes occasionally I meet people who are worried that they haven't got a mentor and they feel like they ought to have one, but you don't need one. It's a nice bonus. It's a good thing. It's a good thing if it can be arranged. It can be very helpful. There can be issues sometimes if you have the wrong mentor, but it's a good thing. It's a fun thing, and you can probably learn a lot. But it's not essential. And perhaps I might mention as well with pictures. Pictures are fun and often educational, but in actual fact, that's not how book publishing in particular works at all. You don't do pictures to sell books. It's actually very rare that would ever happen, because what a publisher is most interested in is always the written work. It's what's on the page. It's not how you present it or how you tell the story, because you can't stand next to someone in a bookshop and tell them the story. You can't be on the screen telling someone the story or reading the first 2 pages to them. It actually has to be on the page. So while I think pictures are fun, and they're often very educational because publishers will respond to them and talk about what works for them and so on, I think, again, it's important not to confuse that with what's really important. And what's really important is always the written work. Your manuscript that leaves you and goes to the publisher is your ambassador. You can't go with it and tell the story to an agent or a publisher. It has to be there on the page. So I think mentors, the right mentor, great, fantastic, can be enormously useful, but not essential. Similarly, pictures are fun, can be educational, but again, they're not the main game. It's not how it all works ultimately. It all comes back to the writing. So I just thought I'd mention those things.
No, thank you. It's really great feedback to hear that, and I think as you say, through that process of crystallizing your story, you do learn things about what you're writing. But yeah, I'm the same. I pick up a book and I'll read the first 2 pages and decide whether I'm going to read it rather than reading the blurb or a quick sentence.
Yeah, that's pretty much actually how everybody works, from all through the business to book readers, just the general public. That's those first few pages, and in fact, when I was an editor myself, and then later when I was an agent, because I had a parallel career in publishing as well as being a writer, I didn't go from being an editor and agent to being a writer. I was always a writer first who happened to work in publishing. Right. The basic process for reading manuscript submissions, of which we would get thousands, is to read the first couple of pages, and from those few pages there would be a triage system where it would be no, maybe I need to read some more, or in the very rare circumstances where you couldn't stop reading, and those were the books that you ended up being published and so forth. So it's what's on the page. It's important, and particularly those first few pages. The cover letter all publishers fear, not fear but dread, I guess, is the one that says the book doesn't really work until chapter 7, but if you stick with it, it's really good. But of course, no one will stick with it. It has to work from the beginning. So make it work from the beginning. Don't make it work from chapter 7.
Yeah, I've heard this story. I can't remember. It had a name. It was basically it was a certain test that if you opened up to any page and kept reading, if that was compelling enough to keep reading, then that was a great book. In that, the idea you don't waste a page. I guess
that's a pretty good test, and I think a lot of that is actually about the voice of the book. If the voice of the book is compelling, it will take you into it at any point. The beginning, of course, is where people normally start, so it is the most important.
Indeed. I want to ask you so many questions. Now, you've opened up like massive cans of worms, and I can see that on Twitter there's already quite a few questions coming through. So I'll just wrap up the final bit of the launch, and we'll dive into some.
Yeah, please carry on. Yeah.
So yeah, there's also excursions involved, which another great part of this program is that it works alongside the National Young Writers Festival program, so that the participants can jump in and out of that. And so we're going to see some things like why YYA, which is hard to say, Writing for Kids, Writers Other Jobs, panels on arts management, and there's another one called Get a Real Job, which sounds quite funny. But yeah, then also things here in the top right hand corner, like there's a zine fair, and there's various readings and performances that we'll be going to. So it's awesome. And thanks again.
Fantastic. Yeah.
It needs to be said to the Centre for Youth Literature for their support. It really couldn't. This part of the program could definitely not happen without them. And you mentioned some of the things they were doing before. Have you had much to do with Inside a Dog?
I've done 2 residencies on Inside a Dog, two online blog residences, which are always tremendous fun. I always read the blog. They have great guests. Always interesting things being said and done. Fascinating. I think, like most writers, I'm always very interested in other writers' processes and how they work. And Inside a Dog, you'll find people talking about all those things. So I do like that very much.
Mm. Yeah, they're great. They're so good. I am also a teacher, and I divert my students to that every time they can't find something to read. I find that hard to believe, but Inside a Dog's fantastic for that. And so yeah, just to wrap up, finally the details are that it's the 2nd to the 5th of October this year. If you want to ask me any questions, my email address is jeff@youngwritersfestival.org. There's a Facebook page. Again, Twitter is the hashtag is YYWP14. And if you want to get involved in the program, please visit the website or email me, and I'll send you the entry form. So thanks very much for that, Garth, for letting me do that. I'm just going to bring you back now.
Fantastic. I would have loved to have gone to something like that when I was 13 or 14, but there wasn't anything. And I would have loved the Young Writers Festival as well, but again, there wasn't anything like that. So
no. So we did talk about this before, but if there was nothing like this, so you were largely writing for yourself. Is that what was happening? I mean, you were talking about being a big writer at school, but was it just to share with teachers, or did you show your friends at all, or was it pretty solitary?
No, I did share with friends. I think ultimately all writing is solitary, and you have to be able to cope with that solitude of you and the screen, or you and the paper, or however you happen to write. So you do need to be able to cope with the solitude of getting words onto a page or onto the screen. But at the same time, of course, most writers would like that work to then go somewhere. Not everyone, and I think it's absolutely fine to write purely for yourself if that's what you want to do. That's also a great thing. So I guess even from a relatively early age, I was not only interested in writing, I was also interested in publishing. I was interested in how work got out to people. I wanted to know how publishing worked. And I read about it, because I didn't really know anybody in publishing. I grew up in Canberra, so back then was a really small city, a country town almost, with a sort of strange federal government thing planted on top of it. So I found out about all these things through reading. I found out about the world of writing and publishing through reading, and I wanted to be published. And my first story was published when I was 19. I'd had stuff published in school magazines and so on, but my first actual paid short story was published when I was 19, and I submitted stories everywhere for years after that without being able to sell any of them for many years. So I also have the traditional array of rejection slips from all manner of places, which is also part of it. It's all part of the process. There will be rejections. Some of them are useful. Some of them are nothing more than form letters, or these days form emails. But it is part of the publishing side of things, and it helps inform the writing side as well. And if you're lucky, you get feedback from knowledgeable editors who will help you hone your work and so on. So yeah, I was always very interested, not just in the writing, but also in how to get that work out to readers.
It's interesting. You were talking before about the usefulness of pictures, and then also you just mentioned rejection letters. I was wondering how important, and you're obviously a wide reader as well, how important is it to know which publisher you're sending things to and where your work should end up?
I think it's very important. I think the more you know about how things work, the better able you are to make informed decisions. And these days, of course, there are many avenues to publishing, because there's the traditional road to the big five publishers and so on via literary agents. That's still very much part of the world. Self-publishing has also opened up enormously in the last few years. So the more you know, the more you'll be able to work out what is the path for your work that will give you the best chance of success. Because you can't make things happen, but you can do things that improve the probability of success. And one of those things is to do the research to make sure you're sending your manuscript to a publisher who actually publishes that sort of work, for example. I'm out of hay fever. So the high pollen day, so I apologise for my snivelling. The more you know, the more it will benefit what you do with your work. But that's separate from the writing. I always advise people, and it's not original advice, it's been said by many writers, that you have the most chance of success in writing something you really want to write, writing something that you love. And you should write that, and then work out what to do with it, work out how to market it, where's the best place for that work to go. Sometimes you find people who think that they should do it the other way around and try and find out what's hot in the marketplace, what people are reading, and then write something aimed directly at that market. And that can work, but it's actually far less likely to work. It doesn't work very often, because typically when someone tries to do that, they don't really want to be doing it. They don't really want to write that romance novel or write that thriller or whatever, and that shows through in the eventual manuscript most of the time. Whereas if you really love it, you read the stuff, you want to write that kind of book, your passion will go into the words, and it will show up. So I always say, write what you really, really want to write, and then figure out what's the best path to get that work out to readers, and do the research. Find out which agents handle that sort of material, which one's the best for it. If you want to go directly to publishers, research the publishers. If you want to self-publish, look into how you do it, look into the pitfalls and so on. And you can mix it up as well. Just because you self-publish now doesn't mean you can't then follow a traditional road down the track. There's a lot of mix and matching these days. So I think keep an open mind and keep informed is very important.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that you say that you should write what you're interested in reading, because I've noticed you've tried your hand at quite a few different types of genres. I guess you've written dystopian books, you've written some short stories, you've also written collaboratively with Sean Williams. I mean, how have you found writing across different genres and I guess different styles of books?
Sure. I've actually written many more different things too, because I also worked in public relations for quite a few years, where I wrote everything from speeches for CEOs to white papers on networking products and brochures for brickworks and advertisements and all manner of things. I've written screenplays as well, unproduced screenplays. I have a number of unproduced screenplays that I've written. All of these things are different aspects of the craft. There's the craft of writing. I mean, writing is both an art and a craft, and you can learn the craft aspects, and you can learn the craft aspects you need, the craft skills you need for different kinds of writing. Business writing. Some crashing and banging going on in the background behind you there, Geoff.
Oh, is it? My fiance is making dinner, I think. Okay,
oh, that's very lucky.
Yes.
As long as there's nothing serious falling down or anything like that.
I'll just... Are you okay? I think she's fine.
It sounded like a pot or a pan dropping, but hopefully all is well. So yeah, an art and a craft. So the craft aspects you can learn, you can practice, you can improve, and you can learn what you need for different kinds of things, different kinds of writing. The art side of things is somewhat more difficult, and you may or may not ever have that. But if you have those basic craft skills, you can write a pretty good book. I think, of course, having the artistic talent added to those craft skills can make an even better book. And of course, the really great books are written by people who are great artists as well as great craftspeople. It's something that we all hope to be without actually achieving. But the craft you can work on, so that's good.
Sorry to cut you off, Garth. I was going to say, then how did you find it working with someone that may have a different art to you, I guess, in Sean Williams? How was it working collaboratively on something?
Sure. Well, Sean and I are actually quite similar in our approach to the craft in general. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to write together. We also wanted to write together because we're old friends, and we thought it would be fun. It would be a fun thing to do. When we were talking about writing being solitary before, which it is, you spend a lot of time by yourself working on a book or whatever. So we thought it would be fun to write something together. But we also approached it in a very business-like way. We liked many similar books. We talked about how it would work. We talked about how the process would work. We had our expectations were very similar. We had a written agreement, which is something that's always very important for co-writers. If you're ever writing something with somebody else, you need from the very beginning to set out an agreement, a legal agreement that defines who owns what, who will do what happens if you decide to split up or stop working on that particular project. If you do that right at the beginning, there won't be any problems later on. So I always advise people who are thinking of co-writing that make sure that you work out those details first. And I guess the other aspect of it is that with Sean and I, we both have written a lot of books by ourselves. So this wasn't something where all our energy and identity was invested in these co-written books. This was an additional thing we were doing, largely for fun, on top of our main work. And it's been great. We've really enjoyed it. And one of the reasons we wanted to do is so we could go on tour together. So it wouldn't just be by yourself on tour. You know, you have a friend to have a drink with after the signing sessions or whatever. So that's been fun. But you have to have a similarity of outlook and philosophy, I think.
It struck me before as you were talking about the agreements. It sounds like a writing prenuptial.
Yeah, well, exactly. That is what it is. That's right. But it's like any joint venture. You wouldn't go into business running a restaurant with someone else without having an agreement. You wouldn't run any kind of business. Well, I hope you wouldn't without having an agreement. And writing something together is really no different.
Totally. And I guess that kind of leads me on to asking you a question about how you go about writing in terms of your, I guess, how you structure your day. Where do your ideas come from? Like, do you have a specific kind of routine at all?
I do, but my routine has changed a lot over the years, and I think again it's important not to be too obsessed with particular routines. I think all writers are have a tendency towards the superstitious, and you start thinking, well, I can only write if I've got my special pen or my special hat, or I have to have this attic, or I have to have this particular computer, and if I haven't got it, then I can't do it today. I have to sort this out. So I think routines are good, and it's good to have a routine, but you should also be prepared to change it if necessary. So, for example, when I started seriously writing my first books, I had very busy day jobs, as you nearly always do. Most writers, in fact, do have day jobs. So I had a very busy day job, and I would just write a couple of nights a week, and on most Sunday afternoons, I'll try and write for 2 or 3 hours every Sunday afternoon. And as I wrote, I would keep track of my word count. I'd write the date down when I finished a chapter and the word count, and slowly, build it up and look at my accumulation of words. And I found that very encouraging to look at it and say, okay, well, I'm now up to 15,000 words. I'm now up to 23,000 words. And I also always told myself, I don't have to write a book. I have to write a chapter. I have to write a 2,000 or 3,000 word chapter. So that was always my goal. It was never, oh my gosh, I've got to write a 100,000 word book. It was just this finite chunk which I can do. So my first half dozen books were all written at night, on Sunday afternoons mostly, while I had very busy day jobs. When I became a full-time writer, which was around about 2000, 2001, I basically flipped that around, where I started writing during office hours, and I didn't write at night, and I didn't write on the weekends. And for the last 14 years or so, that's mostly what I've done, is I actually have had a separate office for most of that time. I walk to the office. Like most people, when they arrive at the office, I stuff around, I answer emails, I do all the things that are to do with the business side of writing, because you become a small business and there's always things to be dealt with. Particularly when a book's about to come out, you have a lot of promotional stuff you have to do, which you might get 10 interviews with 20 questions each that is basically will take 3 or 4 days to answer them all. And that comes and goes. There's all kinds of stuff, things like this talk we're having. So there's that side of things. But what I try and do nowadays is I try each day to write, not for a set period of time. I don't say I must write for 3 hours between 10 and 1. Some people do. You have to find out what works for you, and there's lots of different routines that can work. So it's good to try them and see what happens. What I try and do is I just try and do a sort of chunk of work that feels like I've achieved something, and then I will push a little bit beyond it. I always try and do more than I've set out to do. So instead of just finishing a chapter, I'll start the next chapter. Instead of finishing after I've written 2 or 3 notes about a story, I'll try and write some more notes about it, or write the first few paragraphs, and that's basically what I do. So I work business hours now, but towards the end of the novel, I always end up writing in the evenings and on weekends as well. As the momentum grows, I end up doing more work. And looking back at my records of how long it takes to write a book, I normally write probably the second half of the book is written in about a quarter of the time, or even 20% of the time, and I accelerate as the momentum grows. But having a routine is good, but there's lots and lots of different routines that you can have.
So you got to be flexible when you're on a roll, I guess.
If you can, I think it's when the momentum is there, it's good. But you also have to create the momentum in the first place, which means forcing yourself to keep working, even when you don't want to. And of course, this is just a variation on the very old writing advice that the most important thing to do is just to sit down and do it. Just sit down in front of the keyboard and just start doing it. Sit down in front of a notebook and write with your pen, whatever. Ultimately, it always comes back to that. These days there's many layers of other writing advice all wrapped around that basic thing, and some of it's really helpful to people. Not all. There's no one kind of writing advice. There's no one size fits all. So a writer can tell you how they wrote their book or how they generally write their books. It may work for you. It may not. I think it's important not to take anything as gospel that there is only one way to write a novel, or the way that XYZ writes their books is the best way. You have to just try and work it out for yourself.
Exactly. I think it's like you were saying before about learning from reading. If you keep listening to other people and their experiences, then you might find something that works for you for a period of time as well. I wanted to ask you a bit of a selfish question. I'm a geography and English teacher, and and I was really drawn immediately to the map in the front of Sabriel when I was reading it. You know, I was looking at it as a geography teacher, but I'm curious. Like, does that kind of thing come before or after or during the writing of a really expansive world within the story? Like, do you make that decision before or after?
Well, again, different people do this in different ways. You know, some fantasy writers do plan everything out about their world beforehand. I'm not one of them. But I do sketch out some of the details of the map as I begin, and then I fill it in as I'm going along. I fill out the map as I need to know more information to match the story, and also to work out how long it takes to get between A and B and so forth. So I build it up over the course of the story, and I typically only have, in terms of geography, in terms of other details, I only ever find out what I need immediately for the story. So I'm discovering the world as I go through the story. Of course, with something like Sabriel and the other books in the Old Kingdom series, because I've written lots of them and built them up over time, there's a lot there now, and so I need to add less in some circumstances. But for example, for Clariel, the new book out in October, I had to do a new map of the city of Belissaire, which is in the book, because I'd sketched out stuff, I'd written about it, but there wasn't a detailed map, and I thought it would be good to have a detailed map for the book. So I did have to work out where everything was, and of course I also discovered that there were a few little problems between the books where I'd written something which didn't really fit in with what I needed to have happen in Clariel. Fortunately, it's a big ancient city, and Clariel takes place 600 years before Sabriel, so you've got time for things to have changed.
You'd hope so.
Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. I'm hoping I won't get called on that. Someone will say, hang on a second, this aqueduct wasn't there, and Sabriel. So, well, yeah, they knocked it down and built a new one 200 years before, or 300 years before Sabriel, you know.
I was going to ask that question as well. Like, what's it like visiting a place that you created? I mean, Sabriel came out in 1995. So, like, what's it like going back to a world that you created at the beginning of your career?
Well, I guess I revisited it for Larry Allen and Pawson, but again, that was in the late 90s, early 2000. I guess I wrote those two books. I've written a couple of long short stories, novelettes. In that world. So I guess I've kept my hand in some degree over the years, but I did have to go back and reread the books several times, and that was interesting. I hate rereading my earlier work. I like to move ahead. I like to write new things. For the same reason I find it difficult to listen to the audio books as well, because I'm always thinking, oh, I should have changed that sentence, or I wish, that was a bad word choice there. So rereading the books was a bit of a challenge. But one of the interesting things was how much I'd set up subconsciously. There's little hooks to small details that I hadn't realised I'd put there and I'd forgotten about, but I needed them for Clariel. So that was an interesting psychological exercise, I guess, that even back then I was still setting things up for other books. And I think that's one of the great mysteries and wonders of writing, is when you're writing a book and you're 2/3 of the way through and you think, oh, I want this to happen, and then you think, oh, but I've got to have had this happen before. Oh, I've already done it. I've set it up without actually realizing I specifically needed to do so. And I love it when that happens and everything's driven the story towards the point where it has to go, but the conscious mind wasn't necessarily aware of it.
That's really fascinating. I can't wait to read. Well, I've only read Sabriel and the following two books, and then looking forward to the Clariel coming out. It's 3 or 4 weeks. Are you going on tour soon?
Yeah, well, I have some events this week. One in Canberra on Wednesday night, and the Sydney launch at Kinnicunia on Thursday night, which they're both public events. Everyone's welcome. So they're very early. The books will be out earlier than the release date both those events, so special sneak preview, as it were. And then I leave for UK on Tuesday next week, and I start in Ireland. I'm in London for a couple of days, and then go over to Dublin, and I start my Irish and UK tour there the end of next week, and then a few weeks in the UK, and then over to the United States, and continue on. But Clariel generally comes out the first week of October, pretty much everywhere: Australia, New Zealand, UK, USA, Canada. So roughly the first week of October. There's minor differences, but it should be pretty much everywhere by that first week.
That's really exciting. I have a great trip. I've noticed that I think now might be a great time to head to Twitter.
Sure.
We've got a couple of questions here from people. This Hannah Gordon has asked a question about the Old Kingdom series. It says, in the Old Kingdom series, your characters have such powerful names. She wants to know, where do you get your names from?
Okay, where do I get the names from in the Old Kingdom? I spend a lot of time working on names. I think names are very important, and names have great resonance. So the wrong names will throw you out of a fantasy novel, in particular, or any novel, but a fantasy novel in particular. The wrong names will throw you out of that very swiftly. So it's important to get them right. With the names in the Old Kingdom, I made them up using different combinations of word fragments and endings. And for Sabriel, for example, I wanted a name that was sort of dark and powerful. And I was playing around with different words and parts of words that meant dark or black, and combining them with the IEL and AEL endings that you find in angels' names, which mainly come from Hebrew. So those endings already have enormous resonance. We feel that they are powerful. They are the names of angels. They resonate very strongly in Western civilization. And I actually ended up taking the heraldic term for black, which is sable, and I was trying something with sable combined with IEL and AEL endings, and I went through probably 30 or 40 different combinations, writing them all down before I worked out Sabriel. And I also say them aloud and see what they sound like, and I found Sabriel, it sounded a great name, and it also it felt dark and powerful. So that's pretty much the process. I muck around with words and words in particular that have historical or mythic resonance until I find something. That works. And I also do the other time-honored thing, which is steal a name from Shakespeare, because Abhorsen is a very slight variation on a character from Measure for Measure. In Measure for Measure, there is a character called the Abhorson, S-O-N, rather than S-E-N, and he is an executioner. And what I did there was I wanted, the Abhorsens are kind of executioners of the dead. That's their job. Their job is to make the dead stay dead. And so I went looking through literature, history, myth, for the names of famous executioners. And I found Abhorsen, and I thought, I'll have that. And I just slightly changed the spelling. So that's where that name came from. So that pretty much demonstrates how I go about it, is to trawl through history, myth, legend, and either nick names completely or mix and match something till I get the name that sounds right, that has the right resonance.
Have you ever come across someone that actually has that name, or someone's named their child after?
Yeah, there's lots. Yes, there's quite a few. I get emails and people tweet about calling their children Sabriel and Lirael. There's an awful lot of cats called Mogget. Dogs, which is great. I mean, I'm incredibly pleased. I'm incredibly pleased that people like the names enough to want to name, well, their children particularly, but also their cats and their dogs. after my characters. There's quite a time-on tradition of this. Apparently, the name Lorna was unknown before Lorna Doone, for example.
Wow.
There's a few others. So yeah, maybe there'll be many Sabriels in years to come, and people will have completely forgotten where it came from.
I've also heard the same thing about Madison from the movie Splash. Have you seen that?
Oh, well, could be. Yeah. You never know.
I'm not sure if that's true.
Well, as a surname, of course, that goes back a long way. I mean, the U.S. president and so on, but
But as a first name, yeah.
Yeah.
Hannah's actually asked another question, and I think it kind of fits in nicely with what we were just talking about. It says, your worlds always have a sense of vastness, but a hint of mystery, of something hidden. She's asked, what's your world building process? And we kind of touched on this before with the maps.
Yeah, it's basically the same as the maps, in that I work out what I need for the story, and I don't really go deeper than that at the time, but I always want to give the impression that there's much more there. I said this a few years ago, that all fantasy novels should be like an iceberg. The text is the 10% visible, but you should feel that there's another 90% hidden beneath the surface. And of course, classically, something like The Lord of the Rings, for Tolkien, the other 90% was not just under the surface. He actually had written it. He'd invented the languages and so on. The other 90% was actually all there. To me, that seems like an awful lot of work, and frankly, I would have rather Tolkien had written more novels and less history and less language. That's just my personal preference.
Me too.
But I think you need to create the illusion. You need to make readers feel as if that other 90% is lurking there. And to me, it is there. I just don't know what it is until I need it. And I thought this was an original expression of mine, but not that long ago I discovered that Hemingway, in fact, said all novels should be like an iceberg. So there you go.
Yeah, right. And
said it. It must be true. World building. I work out what I need for the story. I quite often place little hooks for things that may connect us to deeper matters, but I don't necessarily know what they are until I need them again, and later on I will work out what I need, and that's part of the fun for me as well.
And like you say, if you're building a world that's like an iceberg and there's 90% untouched, you've got so much to I guess, gold to mine then for things like Clariel. So you
absolutely,
come back to it.
Absolutely. And if you've done the top layering properly, connecting down into things is reasonably straightforward. There should be enough threads dangling that you can follow them down and connect them up to new things.
And I guess that also leads into people writing fan fiction as well, and creating stories that could happen in that world of their own.
Yeah, I mean which is fun. I think it's I have no problem with fan fiction. I don't read it, obviously, for a number of different reasons. Time being one, but also because of potential legal implications.
Sure.
But I have no problem with people writing. I think it's great. People are inspired to do stuff. I mean, one of the things I love is all the artwork that people have made for the Old Kingdom books in particular, but also for the Keys to the Kingdom. On DeviantArt, for example, there are thousands of pieces of art for Sabriel Horse, and some of them are absolutely brilliant. I mean, they are totally professional. They are amazing, and in general, it's just great. No matter what the artwork is like, it's great that it's been inspired by the books, costumes, cosplay, all that stuff. I think fantastic. I'm glad I've done something that's sparked something in someone else. I mean, I'm the beneficiary of so many books and movies and music and so on have sparked things in me. It's great to be able to pass it all along a bit.
Yeah, totally. What a reward! It must be
fantastic.
We've got about 5 minutes left. I think I'll take one last question. You were talking before about you being such a big reader and finding time between writing and doing promotion. Is there anyone that you're reading at the moment that you could recommend? There's Burger Kingler has asked is there anyone that you could recommend reading at the moment that you're really enjoying?
Well, I'm always reading. I read quite a few different books at different times for different reasons. I've just been rereading some books, and this is part of my strange eclectic mix, I guess. I've just been rereading Neil Stephenson's big sort of near future thriller, I guess, Ream D, like Read Me, but mixed up, Ream D, which I love Neil Stephenson's work. He's an incredibly eclectic writer himself. He's written so many different things, from sort of seminal cyberpunk novels to wide-ranging historical novels, and to Ream D, which is a near-future thriller. I've also been rereading some old detective stories, some old Dorothy Sayers novels, Lord Peter Wimsey novels. In young adult, the most recent young adult books that I've read, which I loved, were The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. I love all her work. I read, what else have I read? The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. I met Maggie on tour earlier this year, and The Scorpio Races is a fantastic book. I've also been reading some non-fiction. I've been reading about the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683.
Wow.
As you do. So one of these days I want to write a big siege of a city book, and so it's a fascinating. I think there's a lot of. It's been done, of course, but there's always room to do something else, to do another one. It wouldn't be Vienna as such, but it's always interesting to read history and see how you might draw some aspects from it. What else have I been reading?
Well, like you were saying before, you'd be able to write. You said you would write something that was non-fiction, but you'd end up being a little bit strange. You'd put your own spin on it.
Well, I've tried to write straight historical stuff, and in fact, I've written a Regency romance, Newt's Emerald, but of course, it's not a straightforward historical romance. It has magic in it. It started off as a straight historical romance, but the magic crept in.
That's a nice metaphor. I want to say thank you so much again, Garth, for your time.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
This evening. It's been really wonderful to talk to you for the last 40 minutes and have people asking questions through Twitter. You've already given some dates about Clariel. If anyone's interested in getting involved in the Young Writers Program, check out the website, youngwritersfestival.org/YYWP, and check out Garth's book on shelves in Sydney and Canberra, at least, from next week.
Yeah, this week, actually, in Sydney and Canberra. Well, only at 2 bookshops, only with those 2 events, but it'll be around in next week. It'll be and of course the ebooks as well, from the first week of October. But good luck with the festival. It sounds brilliant. As I said, I would have loved to. I wish there'd been something like it when I was the relevant age, and I'm sure everyone will have a fantastic time. And I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you very much, Garth. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you.